Hi, this is Angelo John Lewis for the Diversity and Spirituality Network podcast. In case you're not familiar with us, we're a group of folks that are actively exploring the integration of diversity and spirituality. We have different opinions as to what that looks like within the network, but for me personally, I see the exploration of difference and the other as a sacred path in and of itself. If you want to know more about us, please go to our website, diversityandspirituality.com, and you can find out more about us that way. Today, it's an extraordinary privilege to interview a man I've been following virtually, whose name I will not butcher. Ted DesMaisons. How'd I do?
That's pretty darn close. We did a little adjustment, but pretty close.
Ted describes himself as a mindfulness teacher, an implied improviser, and a presence coach. And he has quite an extraordinary, interesting background. Starting is not the right word, but at one point, he spent 12 years of teaching religious studies and philosophy in a New England boarding school. And today he's the founder of something called Animal Learning, in which he provides learning opportunities based on 4 principles: growth mindset, applied improvisation, contemplative practice, and positive reinforcement. He's got serious credentials in both acting and in improvisation, and I guess in business because he went to Stanford's Graduate Business School and the Harvard Divinity School. He teaches the mindfulness course through Stanford University's Continuing Studies program, co-facilitates the Monster Baby podcast, and he'll tell you about that if we go in that direction. And perhaps most excitedly, and that's it's current, he's the author of the hot off the presses book called Playful Mindfulness. And Ted, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Angelo. Great to be here. Great to be with your listeners. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm really fascinated by the work you're doing too. So I'm psyched for this conversation.
Well, I mean, I should say to folks that the reason I found Ted was that as some of the 15 regular listeners of this podcast know, we're planning an event called the Improvisation and Spirituality Workshop in the UK. So that came about because I met this other improviser, and we started talking about the connection between mindfulness and spirituality, and said, well, let's do this thing. So I figured I should do some research and see how many people were doing such things, and how many people had some knowledge of this rather arcane intersection of the two things. And Ted was sort of the main man who seemed to be involved in these things. So Ted, I always like to start these questions by asking you, tell me a little bit about your improvised life in the context of your religious education, let's say, and also your spiritual exploration.
You know, it's funny, Angelo. In some of the work I do, we talk about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And a fixed mindset believes that we're given the gifts that we have at birth, and we're sort of dealt the hand we're dealt with, and that's kind of it. Folks who tend to lean on that or believe that can be pretty brittle about their learning. Growth mindset says we gather things and we learn through mistakes and trial and error. And folks who have a growth mindset tend to be much more resilient and that sort of thing. So I try to lean much more towards a growth mindset in my thinking. And I definitely think we get dealt certain cards. And one of the cards I got dealt with was a streak of independence when it came to spirituality and religion. And so even, I grew up Catholic, and
Me too.
Yeah. And from the very beginning, I was like, I don't know about this. and such that when I was in 2nd grade, Sister Linda Bessam, who was a friend of my mom's, and apparently alternative nun, progressive nun, was willing to help me write an individually designed First Communion ceremony.
2nd grade?
In 2nd grade.
Wow.
So we wrote prayers. She wrote a song for me, and I structured this prayer. We used real bread. So, from way back in the beginning, I was always like, I want to figure this out for myself. And then in high school, I got into Taoism and Native American thinking, and then I worked at a Methodist summer camp, and I worked at a Quaker summer camp and a Unitarian summer camp, and I learned about deep ecology and the world of nature and mystery there, and that got introduced to Buddhism through some teachers. And
So did you have parents that had a conventional religious thing?
my folks met at the Catholic Center at Tufts University, so they were both Catholic. But my dad, I think, was more. I don't think he's going to hear this podcast, so I can say. But I think my dad was a committed Catholic, especially as a kid. He was an altar boy and so on and so forth. But more so because his mother was, and so he sort of followed in her footsteps. And my mom was Catholic, but was also a very free thinker. And so she was into astrology and New Age thought and, channeling and this kind of thing. And so I had because I lived with my mom, I had a sort of wide range of stuff, and I just soaked it all up. And, 8 years old on the bookshelf, Mom, who's this Carl Jung guy? And she said, I think it might be a little too soon for that, but maybe someday you'll be interested in Carl Jung. And I ended up majoring. That was part of my major at college, which was individually designed. So, it was a Catholic background. I went to Catholic school until fourth grade. So I got a strong sense of God and the divine and the importance of ritual. And I think the center of my spiritual understanding is based in love. And I think that comes from what I learned at Catholicism. But I was eager to shed the notions of shame and guilt and ideas about sexuality and ideas about women, and particularly ideas about authority. I just never bought into the notion that we have the answers and we'll tell you what they are.
Yeah, there's a lot we could go about your background, but I guess cutting to the chase is that you've put together this improvisation, and I guess it's an easy word to use as mindfulness. It's easier to use in spirituality, but I'm just curious as to how that came about for you.
Well, yeah. So I got into improv when I was in college, and it was pretty clear to me. I think it would have been clear anyway, but my teacher was very much along this line of thinking, that improv was not just a creative practice, but that it was a life practice as well. And so many of the lessons that one gets from improvisation are spiritual in nature, if one chooses to look at them that way. And so I think the mindfulness is one component of that spirituality that's present in improvisation. And it's perhaps the richest one, or the widest vein to explore. And that's kind of where I've chosen to place my focus these days. But I think that the spirituality that's present in improv is wider than just the mindfulness component of it. It's pretty available. And so I was interested in that connection. And then when I was at my first Applied Improvisation Network conference in Baltimore in 2011, whenever we gather, we have what's called open space.
I know open space.
Yeah, so I figured you would be familiar with that. And so, I posted a sign saying I was interested in doing something on improv and spirituality. And a guy came up to me and was like, hey, I'd be interested in doing that with you. Would you like to do that? Like, great. His name is Court Worthington, and he teaches leadership and improvisation at Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. And so we crafted something up, and like 20 people came, and we had a great time. It was a great conversation. And then Court and I ended up designing a workshop that we called, what do we call it? A collaborative inquiry, improvisation and spirituality, a collaborative inquiry. And we got 9 people to go to a Zen center up in Marin County and met for 3 days and just had a great time. And that sort of sparked this whole thing.
So I know that you went to Harvard Business School, and you have credentials in that world. Harvard Divinity School.
Mm-hmm.
I've been fascinated with the idea that there's improvisation in a lot of different traditions, and I'm curious as to what you've found, if anything, with regard to that.
That's a really interesting question. I think my first inclination would be the reverse. So I'm curious to hear more about your impression of that. I just went to a really fascinating event the other night here in San Francisco at a Eastern Orthodox church. There was a visiting icon of the Virgin Mary that is apparently emitting or secreting myrrh oil miraculously. So I went, and it was very scripted. I mean, all the words and the people crossing themselves over and over again at specific times, and the incense, and it was all like everybody knew what was happening. Didn't sense a whole lot of improvisation. But then at the end, people could come up and touch the icon and get a blessing from the Father. And people's prayers and interactions with the icon were quite improvisational. So I think that my sense to respond to your question is that the improvisation seems to more often come through individual practice. But that ceremonies seem to be more scripted. And I don't know if that's true in all ceremonies. Certainly a lot of musical presentation or performance within religious ceremonies would be more improvisational. But how do you see that show up?
Well, I haven't found it, quite frankly, to the degree that I was looking for to reinforce my point of view.
And isn't that what this is all about? I just want to reinforce my point of view.
However, one of my things in my background is I was deeply involved in so-called holistic health from a fairly younger age, specifically macrobiotics.
Okay.
And in macrobiotics, those people of a certain age probably don't know what it is, but at one point it had a moment. And it's basically a dietary practice that has Oriental overtones. And we would use yin and yang to study everything. And in there, I got introduced to, martial arts, shiatsu, this, that, and the other thing. And I also got introduced to something called Reido. Reido means way. Reido means soul. Do means way. And it's basically spontaneous movement is really what it is. And so in a way, interesting, when I was talking with my collaborator in this UK thing, Jules Munns, he does improv once a year at a Rajneesh facility. And as part of what they do is that they do improvisatory type of activities. And also in Japan, there's something called Katsugan, which is invented by a Japanese guy. And basic idea is that if you allow spontaneous movement to happen, my earthquake is happening here. Your body will heal itself. It'll bring itself into balance. Let's put it that way. So, I'm just curious. In other words, like there's this thing that we do that those of us that are mindfulness people, let's say, we do a kind of I'll call it a passive practice for the most part, and there are people that combine that. At the tail end of that, there's an improvisation element to it. So I'm curious as to the relationship between the two things. You, for example, called your book Playful Mindfulness, which kind of implies that most mindfulness is not particularly playful. So it almost seems like it's a good balance for, so-called serious training.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the Eastern traditions, because now that you say it, I could definitely see more improvisational component there. And there's also that quality of playfulness that most of the Buddhist monks I know smile and laugh a lot.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of willingness to be silly that shows up in practitioners, although sometimes not in those who are teaching it, because we're trying to hold a kind of level of integrity or seriousness. There's a sincerity that we want to uphold, and a recognition that these practices are sacred, and sometimes the playfulness gets lost. You used the word passive as a practice. It's sort of that caught my attention. I'd be curious to hear more about that. But because I think that the playfulness introduces an element that's not quite as passive. And so it's to say that mindfulness, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think that silence and sitting still are super important and develop really powerful skills and ways of being. And mindfulness can also be interactive and can also be playful, and that there are things that show up in those modes of practicing mindfulness that don't show up in the sitting. There are things that show up in the sitting still that don't show up in the playfulness as well, so that they can go together. But in the same way that, Taoism talks about the notion of Wu Wei, I imagine you've heard of that, but action through inaction is like taking the path that water would take going down a mountain, just kind of going with the flow. It's not, my understanding of it is it's not completely passive. It's almost like you still have a rudder on your canoe as you're going down the river, and you can kind of direct where you're going a little bit, and you're also going with the flow. So there's both the flow and the participation with the flow that makes it more engaged and activated. And I think that playfulness is just awesome at getting to that. It's also in a Zen kind of way of short-circuiting the intellect and kind of getting to truth, that there are things that happen in play, realizations that come to mind that show up faster or more suddenly than they do through sitting. It's kind of fun to kind of jump in that mix and see what happens.
I'm wondering, obviously people are all different. Have you met people that you seem to, when you see them and you talk to them, get to know them, you have a sense that this person has lived a truly improvised life?
Yes.
Tell me.
I would say it's rare. I mean, I know a bunch of people who do it because I hang out with applied improvisers,
Right.
and we tend to practice what we preach. But it's challenging to live a truly improvised life because we're conditioned. I think we're conditioned to be afraid. Where are we going to get our money, and who's going to take care of us, and how are we going to take care of ourselves and our kids, and so on and so forth. Granted, it's much easier for me to live an improvised life as a single man who's white, heterosexual, and educated, and whatever privilege is out there, I'm probably going to be afforded it. And so, the path is open for me in ways that it might not be so easy for other people. That said, I think that lots of people can live at least a more improvised life, and that's kind of what the book is about, and what our podcast, the Monster Baby podcast, is about, is to say, if we're trying to live an improvised life, it would be great to learn the skills that make that more resourceful and more available and easier and more fun. And then once those skills are in place, all of a sudden, improvising my life it actually is possible, and I can do it. Start small and then sort of expand the scope, and all of a sudden I'm not, having to strategize my 10-year plan and achieve it step by step. I'm sort of participating with something larger than myself.
Let me put you on the spot, and I guess I'll answer my own question first, because you won't be as put on the spot. The question is, your work is about this, so maybe it's an easy question to answer for you. But I'm curious as to how you extend it into your life. There's a thing that you do in your workshops, and then there's your life. Mm-hmm. And for me, as I was explaining before, when I learned about this Katsugen thing, I actually took it very seriously. There was a time that I did, and I would deliberately, after doing it, or even not after doing it, I would say, well, I don't know where I'm going to go today. And I would just sort of go outside and sort of see what happened. And something magical would always happen. Initially I would have this fear, why am I doing this? And I'd run into somebody that I hadn't seen, I needed to see, all kinds of things happen. Maybe I should do more of that, because it was a lot of fun, but at the same time, there's an element of fear about it, an element of trust. So I'm curious if you can answer that just from your experience.
Yeah, I love that. So the main way I think about this is, one of my favorite things about improvisation is sharing control. So I'm talking about improvisational theater. So when I'm doing a scene with somebody else, one of the things that's so great is that whatever scene emerges could not have happened without me. And yet there are things that happen that didn't have anything to do with me. And so it's like this new, fresh thing that I contributed to, but I wasn't the sole arbiter of. And so, one of the ways to make that work is to make bold choices and then to respond and to be completely changeable. Bold choice, completely changeable. It's sort of oscillating between these two. And so for me, taking it to improvising a life is to take that same approach. And so here's an example. When I was teaching at a boarding school, I loved my job, loved the kids, had a beautiful home that I was living in, beautiful, beautiful town. And I loved coaching softball, lots of freedom, summers off, Christmas off, spring break, 3 weeks. It was really great. And, I had my food provided for, and I was in a lovely relationship. And I just had this sense that I had something else to pursue, this really strong sense. And I felt like I needed to explore this intersection of mindfulness and improvisation. It had come out of my sabbatical work. And the dean of faculty was like, nah, we don't want to do that course. We want you to keep doing your religious studies courses as they are. So it was just kind of stymied that way. And I talked to my improv mentor, Patricia Ryan Madsen, who taught me at Stanford. She wrote the book called Improv Wisdom.
Oh, I have her book.
Great book. And I said, Patricia, I can't figure out what to do. Like, I feel like I need to go to California because I need to connect with the improv community there. I want to do more work with Lisa. I feel like, but about leaving all this behind, this security and beauty and goodness. And she said, the great thing is you don't need to know how the story's going to end. You just need to figure out what comes next. And it was like, oh, well, I know what needs to come. What needs to come next is I move to California. I don't know what's going to happen after that. And so that was clear. That's the next step. So that was my bold choice. And I said to life, okay, I'm going to do that. And of course, that took a lot of figuring. And like, I left a relationship and, well, we determined whether we were going to stay together. She was going to come with me or not. I had to pack up my stuff, put some stuff in storage. I had a place to come to when I was here, temporary place to settle in. And so, okay, let me just get there and then see what happens, and I just met as many people as I could and went down to Stanford and reconnected with folks there, and went up to Bats Improv in the city, reconnected with folks there, hung out with my buddy Lisa, and I said, introduce me to your friends, please, and slowly, step by step, this kind of, my business emerged and my logo and my way of talking about what I'm doing and then what classes I was going to teach and these workshops and retreats that we did. And so it has simply emerged step by step. The podcast came out of my work with Lisa. Out of the podcast came the idea of writing a book, the process of taking episodes, converting them to chapters and putting the book together. And so now that's been my next big bold step, is to say, I don't know what else I'm doing, but I'm writing a book, and boom, here it is. So now it's out. I have to figure out, how am I going to market it? Where do I, because I self-published it. So there's no engine behind it. So I'm kind of taking a moment, catching my breath, and I'm going to do my taxes this week.
Yeah, gosh.
and then figure out what comes next, and that's the invitational question. That's an improvisational question, and I think a mindfulness one too is, this happened, whatever it is, has happened, what comes next? And that we get to participate in choosing that what comes next. But it doesn't have to be strategized, planned, step by step. It's like, I'm just going to do what comes next and then take stock again and then see. And it feels like a scene that emerges on stage. I feel like I'm doing something with life. Life is participating and I'm participating, and it wouldn't have happened without either of us. And it's just totally exhilarating feeling.
That's beautiful. That, I guess when I think of what you just described, it kind of, to me, it connotates I guess the congruence points between mindfulness or meditation, I'll call it, and improvisation, which is that listening to the inner voice. The response part, the willingness to respond to it, is improvisation. We could say, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
Ted, I've had the experience when I would attempt to teach people Katsugen, or where they would not, they just couldn't do it. So I'd have to give them some music or something so they could sort of get into it. What is it that stops us from being able to improvise, in your sense? I've actually seen classical musicians that can't improvise too. They've been studying music all their lives, and they need to have the scales and need to have the structured and.
Yep. You are hitting on something that's super important. It's something I almost always start my workshops with, and is the second chapter in the book after definitions, is about our relationship to failure. I think it's that we're afraid to mess up because we believe that if we mess up, we're demonstrating that we don't have an ability. That comes back to that fixed mindset. If I don't have the ability, I'll never have it. If I show that I don't have it, people will dismiss me, or they won't like me, or they won't want to be with me. They'll ridicule me. And we're also afraid, Keith Johnstone, who's one of the founding fathers of modern improv, says that, we are afraid to open the door to our creative impulse because we're afraid of three things. One is that we'll be perceived as obscene. One is that we'll be perceived as psychotic. And one is that we'll be perceived as boring. And that if you're not willing to be all three of those things, you won't ever be able to tap into your creative impulse. And what's interesting to me is that he says it's less that we're afraid of being those things than we're afraid of being seen as those things. So it's like there's something about our fear of losing relationship with the people around us if we really truly share what's coming through. And I think it just takes, it takes practice to change one's relationship to one's impulses, to change one's relationship to failure, and to do so within a community of supportive people. And in the improv world, one of the ways that people do that is through what's called the circus bow. Are you familiar with this?
No.
So it comes from Matt Smith and another gentleman, I'm not remembering his name, up in Seattle. But they were watching circus performers, and like whenever the circus performers would mess up, they'd fall off the tightrope into the net, or the tumbler would make a mistake or whatever, they would always bounce back up, take a proud stance, put their arms in the air, and ta-da, and then take a bow as if to say, look, I'm totally fine, we're good. And so usually when we mess up, we scrunch our eyes and clench our fists and turn our shoulders in and kind of lean over. They call that the failure flinch, like protective mode. And rather than going into that failure flinch, you fling your arms open wide and you say, I'm still here, like I'm open, I'm still available. And that is the stance that improvisers need, because if we're doing a scene together on stage and I make a mistake, excuse me, and I start berating myself, or like, God damn it, I'm never going to be a good improviser, then I'm not present for you anymore. And like, you don't need me to beat myself up, you need me to be present. And so that kind of stance of, okay, I'm still here, woohoo, that's the pieces. I messed up, woohoo.
Yeah, that's my colleague Jules Munns, that's one of the first things he does. He says, yay, you failed, let's go,
Right. And it's, it's a distinction that you're not celebrating the failure, but you're celebrating the changed relationship to it.
Right.
It's not controlling you or diminishing you anymore. It's becoming an opportunity.
One of the things that, if you compare and contrast, I'll call it traditional mindfulness and improvisation, to me, the key difference is community. I think that's just so important. It seems if I can sit in a chair and I can meditate for an hour a day, and there may not be an element of community in there that will help me move forward. I don't know, that just seems to be like a real key distinctor, let's say, and a good way to how might improvisation add to your spiritual practice? That's the key for me. That's one of the keys for me.
That it necessarily pulls you into that community.
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that having a meditation or mindfulness community amplifies the positive effect of its benefits immensely. But you're right, one could practice mindfulness alone. One could practice an improvisational approach to life alone, because life is always doing stuff with you, you know, and then the Taoists were really big on learning from nature, and so hanging out with nature is something to do. But you're right, absolutely, that there's something about improvising with humans that really is fun.
Some reason or other, your sound became a little smaller. I don't know what it is. Yeah.
Let me check what microphone I'm on here. I'm still on the same mic.
Well, that's okay. I'm technologically adept. I can boost it if necessary.
Right.
Well, you know, in religious traditions, the religious traditions talk about things like Sangha in the Buddhist tradition, and Christians talk about the body of Christ. So there's a sense in traditional religious practice that the community is a very important thing. In fact, that's really what church does, perhaps better than anything else. You know, you go there, you have a community, you got issues or whatever, your community helps you. There's something that's important for that for me. I guess I'm just sort of, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key things about improvisation is you know, if you have a troupe, you've got a group of people who are committed to each other and committed to a shared sense of values. I'm really involved at BATS Improv in San Francisco. It used to be Bay Area Theater Sports, and you know, I'm on the board there, and there's the company of players, and there's the volunteers and the students who come to classes, and we sort of all know each other and hang out together, and it's just a group of people who really love each other. And when somebody's down, we pick each other up. You know, it's got an element to that.
So I'm wanting to take a risk here, Ted. And as I told you before we did this, I usually write out questions, and it's a very formalized process, and we're just having a conversation, and I'm loving it. Great. But I'm wondering, what might we do? And I'm going to lean on you because you're the applied improvisation guru. What little activity might the two of us do together in this moment to give somebody a sense as to what we're talking about?
Oh, there's so many we could do, but I think might make sense to do word at a time. Are you familiar with word at a time exercises?
I've seen, yes, I think so. It's like you say a word and somebody else says a word. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so we're going to create something together, going back and forth one word at a time. This is a great example of that shared control I was talking about. But why don't we do it this way? And this will appeal to your 15 listeners. I bet there's more than 15. This is an exercise that we do sometimes in our retreats, where we do a word at a time, letter to God. And so we imagine that together we are a 6-year-old girl who is writing a letter to God. We don't know what she's writing it about, but it's going to emerge as we do it. And so I will say one word and you'll say one word.
So we're both the 6-year-old girl writing a letter to the God, and we're doing it together. Got it.
That's right. Yeah. And then we'll see what happens. Make sense?
Hope it works.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will start us off. Dear
God,
my
concern
has
to do 2 words
with
you.
Your
existence
is
unknowable.
What
can
we
do
about
that?
For
me,
as
a
little
girl,
I
want
to
know
you
very
deeply,
and
you
are
exceedingly
mysterious.
Look,
little girl,
I
Am
one
of
many.
deities.
Oh, we switched. I didn't realize that. Okay, great. You
Are
one
of
many.
little girls.
Given
That
we
both
know
each
others
mystery
more
than
we.
acknowledge.
Well, there you go. That's an example of word at a time.
Good fun.
Yeah. And so it just, it just unfolds. And like, I've never done that before. Right. I love it that we're both, you're one of many humans. I'm one of many deities. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, in one of your very sort of elegant in one of your I'll put this in the show notes somewhere in the anima. What is the name of the thing?
Anima.
Yeah. Yeah, as a result of a retreat you did, you came up with 5 different principles that seem to be applicable to both improvisation and spirituality. And one of them was, and you've alluded to it, was play, divine play. Yeah, when I think of religion, I think of spirituality. I don't think so much of play, but it's there. It's there. They talk about it. The monks, as you mentioned, they don't take themselves seriously. They're always smiling and laughing and having a good time.
Yeah.
But there's this other, maybe it's a Western thing. I don't know what it is that we take ourselves so seriously. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. I've got to plan everything out and all that. That's a beautiful thing about improvisation, because when most people talk about theatrical improvisation, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about play. That's what appeals to them.
It's, to me, it's a moment of pure creation. So the word anima in Latin means breath or spirit. And I think of it as that which animates, that force that animates. And so you've got like this pile of flesh or dust or matter or something, and here comes this breath into it, and all of a sudden it kind of like whoop, takes form and like stands up and looks around and like wants to connect. It's like, what's this all about? Who are these people? And that spirit is a spirit of playfulness. Like, let me engage with this. And like, the cat batting the plant to see like, hey, how does this thing move? Right. Or the dog going around sniffing things. It's like, what's here? Check it out. If you've ever had a hound like going through a ravine, like, wow, what's this? This is awesome. And for me, the definition I use of spirituality is the whole person practice of awakening, feeling, and expressing a connection to larger mystery. So whole person practice of awakening, feeling, and expressing a connection to larger mystery. And so it's like, there's something that's out there. Like, how do we get in touch with it? How do we feel it? How do we express it? Play is one of those avenues, because it's just, we're in that present moment. It's like, I'm here with you. We're doing something together. It's got a kind-heartedness to it. It's, I suppose one could play in a mean fashion, but like a cat does with a mouse. Or it's not, I don't think the cat's being mean. I just think it's doing its thing, but it looks cruel from the outside. But the play and spirituality go right together with that sense of hanging out with the mystery. Of course, there are some people who play in a very controlled fashion.
That's true.
And within very limited bounds. And it's not at all about a connection to mystery. It's about, a demonstration of mastery or ability or something, competition, exerting dominance, those things. But I would venture that that's not actually play, as I would call it. That play, as I would call it, is freer from those boundaries.
Well, the other word that you mentioned, which I think is an important thing, is mystery. I mean, I don't know what to say about it. It's like we all study life or something, but we don't really know what the hell's going on. And there's a paradox that's in that also. When people do improv together, they don't know what's going to happen. There's a mysterious element of it. What's going to happen? What's going to be the result of us doing this crazy thing that we're doing?
Yes, yes.
And that's life too, you know. It's like you're teaching at school, and all of a sudden you listen to your inner voice, and all of a sudden here you are in California doing all these wonderful things, you know. But I don't think at any point you knew where it was going.
Yeah, I mean, we have a sense. I mean, I think for me, the image that I use is like throwing out a magnet to the horizon, and then I can let the magnet pull me, but I might well go in some other direction. And one of the lines that we used on our podcast, and I don't remember whether Lisa said it or I said it, but it made it into the book, is that it may seem patently obvious to say, but where you are 5 years from now depends completely on what happens between now and 5 years from now. And you don't know what that's going to be. Of course, it also depends on your intention, but stuff is going to happen and it's going to surprise you, right? Yeah, and improv is a brilliant example of that, because not only do you not know what's going to happen, you also don't know where stuff is coming from. Where do you get the idea to say something or do something, or where does that impulse arrive from? It's awesome that it does, but who knows? And that's cool. I love it. I don't need to know.
And the starting point is like being in the present moment. With the other, who is your partner or whoever you're doing this with. Yeah. So it's pretty delicious that way. Ted, I could talk to you for another couple of hours, but I don't want to indulge my listeners' patience. But I do want to ask you, if people want to know about your work, where would they go? How can they find the book? Obviously, it's called Playful Mindfulness. It'll be on Amazon and all the.
Yeah, well, so they want to get more info on the book. It's Playful Mindfulness, A Joyful Journey to Everyday Confidence, Calm, and Connection. It is available on Amazon. It's also available at playfulmindfulness.info. And, if you, I think that the shop there is going to be up and running in the next couple of days or so. If you buy it there, then you might get a better deal price-wise based on how many you buy, but you're buying it directly from me. So that's kind of cool. I'll pack it up and I can even sign it if you want. And then folks can go to monsterbabypodcast.com if they want to listen to the podcast and tune in that way. But this is when Cord and I did that workshop at the Applied Improvisation Network conference back in 2011. We were like, I bet there's a lot of interest in this out there in the world, but we haven't seen it yet. So let's start doing it and see what happens. So, I'd love for people to reach out and contact me, find me. Again, they can do it through that website. Or of course they can go to animalearning.com too. So really 3 ways to get to me. They all kind of interrelated, but if they're your peeps, I'm sure we'd be getting along, because it sounds like a lot of overlapping interest and style and approach.
Yeah, and I'll put all that stuff in the show notes, and I'm going to give a brief ad for the network here. As I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, we've got this website, diversityandspirituality.com. Every third Saturday of the month, we do an event that's called an online community exploration. It's free or by donation. And we also have an event coming up, which I should plug. It's called Waking Up, the Diversity and Spirituality Network. What's it called? Waking Up, the Improvisation and Spirituality Weekend, with a bunch of people, including renowned UK improviser Jules Munns. And if you want to connect with me, you can just reach me at info@divespirit.com, go to our website. And if you really like the podcast, please rate us on iTunes. And if you really like the podcast and you want to support it, you can do that by going to patreon.com, looking for Diversity and Spirituality. Ted, it's an honor. It's really just delightful to play with you. I can't wait to our next interaction, maybe at one of your workshops, or maybe you'll be gracious enough to host one of our online things at some point. Hey, it's great.
It's been a delight. Thank you so much, Angela. I'm love the work you're doing. I'm proud of it, and I'm excited that you're out there, and can't wait to learn more. So